Alone on the highway, he found a companion. But the real rescue was just beginning. The Nevada sun beat down on the cracked asphalt, the heat shimmering in waves above the highway. Earl gripped the steering wheel of Betsy, his trusty Freightliner, his knuckles white against the worn leather. 70 years old, and he felt every one of them in the ache of his knees and the stiffness of his back. The road stretched out before him, an endless ribbon of gray disappearing into the hazy distance, a perfect mirror of his life lately. Monotonous, predictable, and utterly empty. 5 years. 5 years since Mary had gone. A sudden heart attack, the doctors said. 1 minute she was laughing at his corny jokes. The next, gone. The silence in their small house had become deafening, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a constant reminder of time slipping away. His children, Sarah and Michael, were grown and gone, living their own lives in distant states, Sarah in Oregon with her husband and 2 kids, Michael a busy lawyer in Chicago. He saw them maybe twice a year. Phone calls were sporadic, filled with the polite, strained conversations of people who had grown apart. Earl sighed, adjusting the faded baseball cap on his head. He'd been a long-haul trucker for over 40 years. Seen every corner of this country, every sunrise and sunset, every truck stop, diner, and greasy spoon. He used to love it, the freedom of the open road, the camaraderie with other drivers. Now it was just a job, a way to keep busy, to keep the loneliness at bay. Betsy was his only real companion, the rumble of her engine a familiar lullaby. He glanced at the passenger seat, empty except for a crumpled map and a half-eaten bag of chips. He remembered when Mary used to ride with him sometimes, back when they were young and the world felt full of possibilities. She'd pack a picnic basket, sing along to the radio, and tell him stories that made him laugh until his sides hurt. He missed her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. Dusk was always the hardest time. The shadows lengthened, the loneliness deepened. He switched on the headlights, 2 bright beams cutting through the gathering darkness. He was about to reach for the radio, to fill the silence with some static-filled country music, when he saw it. A small orange lump on the side of the road. Just a flash of color in the fading light. He almost dismissed it, thinking it was a piece of trash, a discarded fast food bag. But some nagging intuition, made him slow down. He pulled Betsy onto the shoulder, the gravel crunching under her tires. He climbed down from the cab, his joints protesting with a chorus of creaks and pops. He walked back towards the lump, his heart beating a little faster. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't trash. It was a cat. A small, skinny, ginger cat, lying motionless on the side of the road. Earl wasn't a cat person. Never had been. Dogs, maybe. But cats? They were too independent, too aloof. But this cat looked utterly helpless. He knelt down, reaching out a hesitant hand. The cat was barely breathing, its fur matted and dusty. He could feel its ribs through its thin coat. It was unconscious, its eyes closed, its body limp. He looked up and down the empty highway. Nothing. No houses, no cars, no sign of anyone who might own this creature. It was clear the cat had been abandoned, left to die. He couldn't just leave it there. He couldn't. With a sigh, he gently scooped up the cat, surprised by how light it was. Felt like holding a handful of feathers. He carried it back to the cab, wrapping it in an old flannel shirt he kept behind the seat. He placed it carefully on the passenger seat, the small orange form a stark contrast to the dark interior of the truck. "Well, Betsy," he muttered, "looks like we have a passenger." The next truck stop was a good 20 miles down the road. Earl drove slowly, glancing over at the cat every few minutes. It hadn't moved. He was starting to think he was too late. He felt a pang of sadness, a feeling he hadn't expected. He barely knew this creature, yet the thought of it dying alone on the side of the road filled him with a deep sense of unease. The truck stop was a typical, neon-lit oasis in the desert. A gas station, a diner, a convenience store, and a parking lot filled with rumbling semis. He pulled Betsy into a spot, switched off the engine, and turned his attention to the cat. He carefully unwrapped the flannel shirt. The cat was still unconscious, its breathing shallow and ragged. He needed to do something, and fast. He grabbed his water bottle and tried to dribble a few drops into the cat's mouth, but it didn't respond. He went inside the convenience store, feeling a bit foolish. He bought a small bottle of milk and a baby medicine dropper. Back in the cab, he tried again, this time with the milk. He gently pried open the cat's mouth and squeezed a few drops in. Nothing. He was about to give up when he saw a waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Doris, clearing tables in the diner. He hesitated, then approached her. "Excuse me," he said, feeling awkward. I found a cat on the side of the road. It's not doing well. I don't know what to do." Doris looked at him, her expression softening. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, not to Earl, but to the cat he described. "Bring it in here. Let me take a look." Earl carefully carried the cat, still wrapped in the shirt, into the diner. Doris cleared a booth and gently examined the cat. "He's severely dehydrated," she said, "and starving. Try some watered-down tuna juice. We have some in the kitchen. It might be easier for him to swallow." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a small bowl of the mixture. Earl, with Doris's help, managed to get a few drops into the cat's mouth. This time, there was a faint flicker of movement. The cat's tongue, a tiny pink sliver, emerged and licked at the juice. It was a small victory, but it was enough. Earl felt a surge of hope, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. He sat with the cat for hours, patiently coaxing it to drink, drop by drop. Doris brought him a cup of coffee and a plate of food, refusing to let him pay. "You're a good man, Earl," she said. "Not many people would stop for a stray cat." He shrugged, embarrassed. Just couldn't leave him there. As the night wore on, the cat, which Earl had started calling Rusty, because of his color and the rough shape he found him in, began to show more signs of life. He lapped up more of the tuna juice, his purrs a faint, rumbling vibration. He still couldn't stand, but he opened his eyes, revealing two golden-green irises that stared at Earl with a mixture of confusion and exhaustion. Earl stayed up all night, checking on Rusty every few minutes. He kept him warm with the flannel shirt and talked to him in a low, soothing voice. He told Rusty about Mary, about his kids, about his life on the road. He hadn't talked this much to anyone in years. The next morning, Earl knew he needed to get Rusty to a vet. He found a small-town vet clinic a few miles off the highway. The vet, a young woman named Dr. Ramirez, confirmed Doris's assessment: severe dehydration and malnutrition. She gave Rusty fluids and some specialized high-calorie food. "He's a fighter," Dr. Ramirez said, "but he's very weak. I'm not sure he'll make it." Earl felt a lump in his throat. "Do everything you can," he said, his voice hoarse. He was surprised by the intensity of his feelings. He'd only known this cat for less than 24 hours, yet he was already deeply attached. Earl left the vet clinic with a bag full of supplies: high-calorie cat food, special syringes for feeding, and a small litter box. He rearranged the passenger seat of Betsy, creating a makeshift bed for Rusty using the flannel shirt and a few old towels. He felt a strange sense of purpose, a renewed energy he hadn't felt in years. The first few days were challenging. Rusty was still weak and needed constant care. Earl had to feed him every few hours, using the syringes to get the food down. He cleaned up messes, changed the litter box, and talked to Rusty constantly, even though the cat mostly slept. But slowly, gradually, Rusty began to improve. He started eating more on his own, exploring the cab with tentative steps. His purrs grew stronger, a comforting rumble that filled the silence of the truck. He'd sit on Earl's lap while he drove, nestled in the crook of his arm, his tiny body vibrating with contentment. Earl found himself enjoying Rusty's company more than he could have imagined. The long stretches of highway seemed less lonely. The silence of the cab was no longer oppressive, but filled with the soft sounds of a living creature. He'd share his meals with Rusty, giving him small, cat-safe portions of his chicken or tuna. He'd talk to him about his day, about the scenery, about anything that came to mind. He started talking to Rusty about Mary. He shared memories he hadn't voiced in years. Their first date, their wedding day, their trips across the country in Betsy, the silly inside jokes they shared. He found that talking about her, even to a cat, helped ease the ache in his heart. It was like Rusty was a silent confidant, a furry little therapist who listened without judgment. At truck stops, other drivers were surprised to see Earl with a cat. Some teased him, calling him the cat whisperer or the crazy cat man. But most were intrigued. They'd ask about Rusty, pet him gently, and share stories of their own pets. Earl found himself engaging in conversations, laughing, and connecting with people in a way he hadn't done in years. "He's a good little co-pilot," Earl would say, a hint of pride in his voice. "Keeps me company." One evening, as he was driving through Arizona, watching the sun set over the painted desert, he realized that Rusty wasn't just keeping him company. He was healing him. He was filling a void in his life that he hadn't even realized was there. He was bringing him back to life, one meow, one purr, 1 mile at a time. He looked over at Rusty, curled up asleep on the passenger seat, and felt a surge of affection. He reached out and gently stroked the cat's soft fur. "Thanks, Rusty," he whispered. "Thanks for finding me." Earl's next haul took him east, towards Oklahoma. It was a route he hadn't driven in years, a route that held a bittersweet significance. It was the same route he and Mary used to take when they were younger, back when they were just starting out, full of dreams and hopes for the future. As he drove, memories flooded back, vivid and poignant. He remembered stopping at a small roadside diner in New Mexico, where Mary had spilled coffee all over herself and they'd laughed until they cried. He remembered camping under the stars in Texas, listening to the coyotes howl in the distance. He remembered the time Betsy had broken down in the middle of nowhere, and they'd spent the night huddled together in the cab, sharing stories and dreams. He talked to Rusty about all of this, his voice sometimes cracking with emotion. He told him about how they'd met, how Mary had been a waitress at a truck stop he frequented, how he'd fallen in love with her bright smile and her infectious laugh. He told him about their struggles, their triumphs, and the deep, abiding love they shared. As he spoke, tears welled up in his eyes. He hadn't cried this much since Mary died. He'd kept it all bottled up inside, afraid to let the grief consume him. But now, with Rusty as his silent companion, he felt safe enough to let the tears flow. Rusty, sensing his distress, would nuzzle against him, purring loudly. He'd rub his head against Earl's arm, his soft fur a comforting presence. It was an unexpected source of solace, this small, furry creature offering a level of empathy that Earl had never experienced before. One afternoon, while he was driving through a particularly scenic stretch of highway, his phone rang. It was his daughter, Sarah. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Just checking in. How are you doing?" I'm okay," Earl said, his voice a little hoarse. "Just driving." "I know this route is hard for you, Dad," Sarah said gently. "Are you sure you're all right?" He hesitated, then said, I have a cat with me." There was a moment of silence. "A cat?" Sarah said, surprised. "You? With a cat?" He explained how he'd found Rusty, how the cat had become his companion. Sarah listened patiently, then said, That's actually really great, Dad. I'm glad you have some company." Her voice was filled with a mixture of relief and happiness. He realized that she'd been worried about him, about his loneliness. He hadn't realized how much his isolation had affected his children. "He's a good cat," Earl said. He helps." "I'm glad, Dad," Sarah said. "I really am." After he hung up, Earl looked over at Rusty, who was curled up asleep on the passenger seat. He felt a surge of gratitude. This little cat had not only helped him cope with his grief, but he'd also helped him reconnect with his daughter. Later that evening, Earl rummaged the box under his bed and found out the photo album. The photo album records him and Mary, on their wedding day, in their youthful embrace, and through the years of laughter and quiet companionship. Rusty, surprisingly gentle, hopped onto his lap, not with playful paws, but with a quiet curiosity. He seemed to sense the reverence Earl held for the worn pages. As Earl turned each page, pausing to trace the outlines of Mary's smiling face, Rusty sat beside him, his green-gold eyes wide and observant. He didn't purr, didn't fidget, but offered a steadfast, silent presence. When a tear slipped down Earl's cheek and splattered onto a photo of Mary holding a newborn Sarah, Rusty, without prompting, reached out a paw and gently patted Earl's hand. It wasn't a playful swat, but a deliberate, comforting gesture. It was as if the cat understood, in his own way, the depth of Earl's love and loss. The night deepened, filled only with the soft rustle of turning pages and the quiet rhythm of Earl's breathing. Rusty stayed there, a warm, comforting weight on his lap, until Earl finally closed the album, his heart aching but strangely soothed. He had shared his memories, not with words, but with a silent witness who offered a different kind of understanding. And in that shared silence, Earl felt a little less alone. The weather turned nasty as Earl crossed into Kansas. The sky, which had been a clear, bright blue, turned a menacing shade of gray. The wind picked up, buffeting Betsy and making the trailer sway. The radio crackled with warnings of severe thunderstorms and possible tornadoes. Earl wasn't overly concerned. He'd driven through plenty of storms in his 40 years on the road. But he was worried about Rusty. The cat had never experienced anything like this before. As the first fat raindrops began to splatter against the windshield, Rusty, who had been sleeping peacefully on the passenger seat, woke up with a start. He looked around, his eyes wide with alarm. The wind howled, and the truck shook violently. Rusty let out a frightened meow, his body trembling. Earl reached over and stroked him gently. "It's okay, Rusty," he said soothingly. "Just a little storm. We'll be all right." But Rusty wasn't convinced. He scrambled off the seat and hid under Earl's legs, pressing himself against his feet. Earl could feel the cat's body shaking. The storm intensified. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the road ahead. The wind roared, and the thunder clapped with deafening force. Betsy was tossed around like a toy, and Earl had to grip the steering wheel tightly to keep her on the road. He decided to pull over and wait out the worst of it. He found a small rest area, just a few picnic tables and a couple of restrooms, and parked Betsy under a large oak tree, hoping it would offer some protection. The storm raged for hours. The wind howled, the rain pounded, and the thunder shook the ground. Rusty remained huddled under Earl's seat, whimpering occasionally. Earl talked to him constantly, trying to reassure him. He realized that he wasn't just responsible for Rusty's physical well-being. He was also responsible for his emotional security. Finally, as darkness fell, the storm began to subside. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the wind died down, and the thunder faded into the distance. Earl let out a sigh of relief. They had made it through. He checked on Rusty, who was still hiding under the seat. He coaxed him out, talking to him softly. Rusty emerged, his fur wet and bedraggled, but he seemed otherwise unharmed. He climbed onto Earl's lap and rubbed his head against his chest, purring loudly. Earl knew he couldn't drive any further that night. The roads were likely flooded, and he was exhausted. He decided to stay put. He found a small, family-run motel a few miles down the road, a quaint, old-fashioned place with a vacancy sign flickering in the rain. He was relieved when the owner, a kindly older woman, said she allowed pets. He carried Rusty, wrapped in a towel, into the room. It was small and basic, but it was clean and dry. He shared his dinner, some leftover chicken from his cooler, with Rusty. The closeness of the small room and the shared experience of the storm had further strengthened their bond. They were two creatures, seeking shelter from the elements, finding comfort in each other's company. As Earl drifted off to sleep, with Rusty curled up on the pillow next to him, he felt a sense of gratitude he hadn't expected. This little cat, this unexpected companion, had become his anchor in the storm, both literally and figuratively. The motel owner had a young son, maybe 8 years old. They came to see Earl, give him some help and check whether everything is fine. They were also trapped by the rain. Earl saw that they only brought very little food, so he shared the canned food he kept in the truck with them, as well as Rusty's food. The mother felt very grateful. The next morning, Earl woke up to a bright, sunny day. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. He felt optimistic, ready to get back on the road. But when he went to start Betsy, nothing happened. The engine wouldn't turn over. He tried again and again, but it was no use. Betsy was dead. He was stranded. He felt a wave of frustration and helplessness wash over him. He was miles from anywhere, with a cat to care for and a deadline to meet. He called his dispatcher, who was less than sympathetic. He told Earl to find a mechanic and get the truck fixed as soon as possible. Earl hung up, feeling more discouraged than ever. He walked around the motel, looking for help. He found a small sign that said, "Joe's Auto Repair 2 miles. He called the number, and a gruff voice answered. "Joe's." Earl explained his situation. Joe, the mechanic, sounded skeptical. "A semi? Out here? I don't know." "Please," Earl said. "I'm stranded. I have a cat with me. I don't know what else to do." There was a pause, then Joe sighed. All right. I'll be there in about an hour." Joe arrived in a beat-up tow truck, his face weathered and lined, his hands stained with grease. He was a man of few words, but he seemed to know what he was doing. He examined Betsy's engine, his brow furrowed in concentration. While Joe worked, he and Earl talked. Earl told him about Mary, about his life on the road, and about how Rusty had become his companion. Joe listened quietly, occasionally grunting in response. Joe, in turn, shared his own story. He'd lost his wife to cancer a few years ago. He understood Earl's loneliness, his grief. He talked about how he'd poured himself into his work, how it had been his salvation. "It's hard," Joe said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Losing someone you love changes you." Earl nodded, feeling a connection with this gruff, taciturn man. They were two strangers, sharing a moment of vulnerability, bound by the common experience of loss. After a couple of hours, Joe found the problem: a faulty starter. He had a spare in his truck and replaced it quickly. Betsy roared back to life. Earl was immensely relieved. He thanked Joe profusely, offering to pay him whatever he owed. Joe shook his head. "Don't worry about it," he said. "Just pay it forward." Earl was taken aback. "But you fixed my truck. I owe you." Joe smiled, a rare and genuine smile. "I know what it's like to be stranded," he said. "And I know what it's like to need a friend. You and that cat of yours, you're good people. Just help someone else out when you get the chance." Earl was deeply moved by Joe's generosity. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was still kindness in the world. He promised Joe he would pay it forward. Joe had a shy daughter, and she stayed behind Joe, never said a word. Earl saw her. He noticed that she looked sad. Joe told Earl that her daughter lost her beloved cat a few weeks ago. Rusty seemed to sense the little girl's sadness. He hopped off Earl's lap, something he rarely did with strangers, and cautiously approached the girl. He sniffed her shoes, then looked up at her with his big, green-gold eyes. Slowly, he rubbed his head against her legs, purring softly. The girl's eyes widened. She reached down hesitantly and stroked Rusty's fur. A small smile crept onto her face. She picked him up, cradling him gently, and he began to purr even louder, nuzzling into her neck. "He likes you," Earl said, smiling. The girl buried her face in Rusty's fur, her small body shaking slightly. It was clear she was crying, but they were tears of comfort, not sadness. Rusty, the little cat who had been rescued from the side of the road, was now offering comfort to someone else in need. It was a small, beautiful moment of connection, a testament to the power of animal companionship. With Betsy running smoothly again, Earl and Rusty continued their journey across the American heartland. They passed through fields of golden wheat, rolling hills, and small towns that seemed frozen in time. The landscape changed, but their companionship remained constant. Earl made frequent stops, not just at truck stops, but also at small-town diners, gas stations, and roadside attractions. He found himself drawn to the slower pace of life, the sense of community he found in these places. Rusty became a minor celebrity wherever they went. People were charmed by the sight of a ginger cat riding shotgun in a semi-truck. They'd stop to pet him, ask about him, and take pictures. Rusty, who had initially been so shy and timid, seemed to revel in the attention. He'd purr and rub against people's legs, soaking up the affection. These interactions sparked conversations. Earl found himself opening up to strangers, sharing stories about his life, his travels, and his unexpected bond with Rusty. He'd talk about Mary, about his children, about his regrets and his hopes. He found that people were genuinely interested, that they listened without judgment. He met a retired schoolteacher in Nebraska who shared her stories of traveling the world. He met a young couple in Iowa who were starting their own organic farm. He met a veteran in Missouri who had served in Vietnam and was still struggling with the trauma. Each encounter, however brief, left an impression on Earl. He realized that he wasn't alone in his struggles, that everyone had their own stories of loss, resilience, and hope. He felt a sense of connection to humanity that he hadn't felt in years. Rusty, meanwhile, was developing his own distinct personality. He had his favorite spots in the cab: the dashboard, where he could sunbathe; the passenger seat, where he could curl up and sleep; and Earl's lap, where he could demand attention. He had his own routines. He'd wake Earl up in the morning with a gentle meow and a nudge. He'd help him eat his meals by trying to steal bites of his food. He'd supervise his driving by sitting on the dashboard and staring out the window. He also had his own unique ways of communicating with Earl. He'd purr when he was happy, meow when he was hungry, and hiss when he was annoyed, usually when Earl tried to put him in his carrier for vet visits. He'd rub against Earl's legs when he sensed he was sad, and he'd lick his hand when he wanted affection. Earl loved listening to music during his long drives. He noticed that whenever the familiar strains of a particular country song filled the cab, Rusty would perk up, his ears twitching. It was an old classic, a ballad about lost love and longing roads, the kind Mary used to adore. At first, Earl thought it was a coincidence, but it happened every time. When the melody began, Rusty would hop onto the dashboard, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, as if listening intently. He'd stay there motionless until the song ended. Then he'd curl back up on Earl's lap, purring contentedly. Earl started to believe that Rusty somehow recognized the music, that it held a memory, however faint, of a time before the side of the road. Perhaps it was a song that played in the car of the person who had abandoned him. Or perhaps it was just a comforting rhythm that soothed his feline soul. Whatever the reason, it became their shared ritual, a silent acknowledgement of the past and a celebration of their present companionship. Earl received a notification from his company, a formal letter reminding him of his mandatory retirement date. It was just a few weeks away. He'd known it was coming, but seeing it in writing made it real. He felt a mix of emotions: sadness, nostalgia, relief, and a touch of anxiety. He loved the road, the freedom, the independence. He'd spent most of his adult life behind the wheel of a truck. It was more than just a job. It was his identity. But he was also tired. His body ached. His reflexes weren't what they used to be, and the loneliness had been taking its toll. He worried about what would happen to Rusty. He couldn't imagine leaving him behind. Rusty had become his family, his closest companion. He knew he couldn't keep driving forever, but he didn't know what else to do. His route took him near Sarah's home in Oregon. He decided to visit, to spend some time with his daughter and her family, and to talk to her about his concerns. Sarah greeted him with a warm hug. She was surprised to see him, but happy. She introduced Rusty to her husband, Mark, and her two children, 8-year-old Lily and 6-year-old Tom. The children were immediately smitten with Rusty. They petted him, played with him, and chased him around the house. Rusty, surprisingly, seemed to enjoy the attention. He tolerated their clumsy affection with patience and good humor. Sarah was initially hesitant about Rusty. She'd never been a cat person, but she quickly saw how much the cat meant to her father. She saw the way Earl's face lit up when he talked about Rusty, the way he cared for him, the way the two of them interacted. Over dinner, Earl and Sarah had a heartfelt conversation. He told her about his impending retirement, about his worries about the future, and about his attachment to Rusty. Sarah listened patiently, offering words of comfort and support. "Dad," she said, "you know you're always welcome here. We'd love to have you closer." She paused, then added, "We have that small guest house in the backyard. It's been empty since Grandma passed away. You and Rusty could live there. You'd be close to us, but you'd still have your independence." Earl was hesitant. He'd always been an independent man, used to living on his own terms. The thought of moving in with his daughter, of becoming dependent on her, was daunting. But he was also drawn to the idea of being closer to his family, of spending more time with his grandchildren. I don't know, Sarah," he said. "It's a big change." "I know, Dad," she said. "But think about it. You wouldn't be alone. You'd have Rusty and you'd have us. We'd be here for you." Sarah prepared a dinner. The taste is familiar. Earl asked Sarah. "It tastes like what Mary always cooked." Sarah nodded. "Mom taught me." Earl burst into tears. He missed Mary so much. Earl embarked on his final long-haul trip, a sense of melancholy hanging over him. It was a bittersweet journey, a farewell to the life he'd known for so long. He was filled with a mix of sadness, nostalgia, and anticipation. He talked to Rusty constantly, explaining the changes that were coming. He told him about Sarah, about the guest house, about the possibility of a new life. He wasn't sure if Rusty understood, but he felt the need to share his thoughts and feelings with his furry companion. As he drove, he reflected on his life. He thought about his childhood, his early years as a truck driver, his marriage to Mary, the birth of his children, the joys and sorrows he'd experienced. He realized that his life had been a long and winding road, full of unexpected turns and detours. He thought about his career, about the millions of miles he'd driven, the countless cities and towns he'd passed through, the people he'd met along the way. He felt a sense of pride in his work, in the contribution he'd made to keeping the country moving. He thought about Mary, about her unwavering love and support, about the void she'd left in his life. He realized that Rusty had helped him heal, had helped him find a way to live with his grief, to move forward. He thought about his children, about the distance that had grown between them, about the opportunity to reconnect, to build stronger relationships. He realized that he wanted to be a part of their lives, to be a presence in their world. He made his final deliveries, saying goodbye to familiar faces at truck stops and warehouses. These farewells were bittersweet. He'd shared jokes, stories, and meals with these people over the years. They were part of his extended family, his road family. He exchanged phone numbers and email addresses, promising to stay in touch. He knew that some of these connections would fade, but he hoped to maintain a few. Rusty seemed to sense the finality of this trip. He was more affectionate than usual, staying close by Earl's side, nuzzling against him, purring loudly. He seemed to be offering comfort, reassurance, a silent promise of continued companionship. As he drove the final miles towards home, Earl felt a sense of peace settling over him. He'd made a decision. He would accept Sarah's offer. He would move into the guest house. He would start a new chapter in his life. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, adjustments, moments of doubt. But he also knew that he wouldn't be alone. He had Rusty and he had his family. He had a future to look forward to, a future filled with new possibilities. Moving day was a whirlwind of activity. Sarah and Mark helped Earl pack up his belongings from his small apartment and load them into a moving truck. Rusty supervised the process, watching from a safe distance, his tail twitching nervously. The guest house was small but cozy, with a living room, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a small kitchen. It had a large window overlooking Sarah's backyard. a perfect spot for Rusty to watch the birds and squirrels. Earl unpacked his belongings, arranging them in the new space. He hung pictures of Mary and his children on the walls. He set up Rusty's bed, his food and water bowls, and his litter box. He felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. He was home. Rusty adapted surprisingly. He quickly explored his new place. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Earl had to get used to a new routine, a new environment. He missed the rhythm of the road, the hum of the engine, the sense of movement. But he also appreciated the quiet comfort of the guest house, the proximity to his family. He started to spend more time with Sarah and her family. He'd have dinner with them most evenings, sharing stories and laughter. He'd play with his grandchildren, Lily and Tom, reading them stories, building Lego castles, and teaching them about trucks. Rusty became a beloved member of the family, a furry playmate for the children and a source of constant amusement. Earl established a new routine. He'd wake up early, make coffee, and sit on the porch with Rusty, watching the sunrise. He'd take walks with Rusty, on a leash, much to Rusty's initial dismay, exploring the neighborhood. He'd visit the local coffee shop, chatting with the regulars and becoming a familiar face. He even started volunteering at a nearby animal shelter. He'd walk dogs, clean cages, and help with adoption events. He found a sense of purpose in giving back, in helping other animals find loving homes. He felt a connection to the animals, a kinship born of shared vulnerability. He still missed Mary terribly. He'd often find himself reaching for the phone to call her, to share a funny story or a moment of sadness. He'd visit her grave regularly, bringing her flowers and talking to her about his life, about Rusty, about his hopes for the future. But his grief was no longer all-consuming. It was a part of him, a scar on his heart, but it didn't define him. He'd learned to live with it, to carry it with him, to find joy and meaning in the present. He found peace and contentment he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer alone. He had his family, his memories, and his faithful companion, Rusty. He traded the open road for a quieter, more settled life, but it was a life filled with love, connection, and purpose. One evening, as he was sitting on the porch with Rusty, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple, he realized that he'd come full circle. He'd started his journey as a lonely, grieving old man, driving an empty road. He'd ended it as a loved and cherished member of a family, surrounded by warmth and companionship. He reached down and stroked Rusty's soft fur. The cat purred loudly, rubbing his head against Earl's hand. Earl smiled. He was grateful for the unexpected journey, for the challenges and the triumphs, for the lessons he'd learned, for the love he'd found. He looked out at the sunset, at the beauty and the peace of the world around him. He knew that his life on the road was over, but his journey wasn't. He had a new road ahead of him, a road filled with family, friends, and the unwavering companionship of a small, ginger cat. Several peaceful years passed. Earl continued to live in the guest house, enjoying the simple rhythms of his new life. He became a fixture in the neighborhood, known for his kindness, his gentle spirit, and his constant companion, Rusty. He'd often be seen walking with Rusty, who had eventually grown accustomed to the leash, stopping to chat with neighbors, sharing stories and laughter. He remained close to Sarah and her family, sharing meals, celebrating holidays, and watching his grandchildren grow. He cherished these moments, the warmth of family, the joy of connection. He'd found a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Rusty, too, thrived in his new home. He became a beloved member of the family, adored by Sarah, Mark, Lily, and Tom. He'd play with the children, chase butterflies in the garden, and curl up on Earl's lap every evening, purring contentedly. One crisp autumn afternoon, Earl was sitting on the porch, reading a book, with Rusty nestled beside him. He felt a sudden wave of fatigue wash over him. He closed his eyes, his head resting against the back of the chair. He felt peaceful, calm. Rusty, sensing something was amiss, nudged Earl's hand with his head. He meowed softly, then louder. Earl didn't respond. Rusty jumped off the chair and ran into the house, meowing frantically. He found Sarah in the kitchen, preparing dinner. He rubbed against her legs, his meows insistent, urgent. Sarah, sensing something was wrong, followed Rusty outside. She found Earl sitting on the porch, his eyes closed, his body still. She rushed to his side, her heart pounding. She checked for a pulse, but there was none. Earl had passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the beauty of the setting sun, with his faithful companion by his side. He was 82 years old. Sarah called Mark and the children. They gathered around Earl, their hearts filled with grief and love. They cried, they hugged, they shared memories. They mourned the loss of a father, a grandfather, a friend. Rusty stayed by Earl's side, his body pressed against his purrs a soft, mournful rumble. He seemed to understand, in his own way, that his beloved companion was gone. Sarah took care of Rusty. The cat who had once been a skinny, abandoned stray now had a loving home for the rest of his days. A testament to the bond he had forged with Earl, a bond that had transcended life itself. The memory of Earl, the kind old truck driver, and his ginger cat became a cherished story in the neighborhood, a reminder of the power of companionship, the healing balm of love, and the unexpected journeys that shape our lives. Everyone laughed at the homeless man who talked to his orange cat, until they found out who he used to be. The old man, they called him Professor Orange, though nobody knew if he'd ever actually been a professor. He shuffled through the streets of Harmony Creek, a small town nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia, his constant companion an orange tabby cat with a perpetually grumpy expression. The cat, perched either on his shoulder or nestled in the crook of his arm, seemed to survey the world with an air of disdain that mirrored, in a feline way, the old man's own weariness. Professor Orange talked to the cat. Constantly, he'd hum little tunes, tell stories, and even engage in what appeared to be full-blown conversations, complete with pauses for the cat's unheard replies. The townsfolk, for the most part, ignored him. He was a fixture, a part of the scenery, like the old, slightly leaning clock tower in the town square or the faded mural of a coal miner on the side of the hardware store. They'd see him sitting on a bench in Miller's Park, sharing his meager lunch with the cat, or huddled in the doorway of the abandoned bakery on Elm Street when the weather turned harsh. Some pitied him, others scoffed. The teenagers, fueled by the callousness of youth, sometimes mimicked his rambling conversations with the cat, their laughter echoing cruelly down the quiet streets. The older residents, those who'd lived in Harmony Creek their whole lives, whispered stories. Rumors, mostly. They said he'd been somebody once. A scholar, maybe. A writer. Someone important. But the details were hazy, lost in the fog of time and the man's own obvious mental decline. Sarah Jenkins, a sophomore at Harmony Creek Community College, found herself strangely drawn to Professor Orange. She was studying social work, and her textbooks talked about the plight of the homeless, the mentally ill, the forgotten members of society. But those were just words on a page. Professor Orange was real. He was a living, breathing embodiment of the issues she was studying, and something about his quiet dignity, even in his disheveled state, resonated with her. "He's harmless, Sarah," her grandmother Martha warned her. Martha had lived in Harmony Creek for 70 years and claimed to know the history of every brick and cobblestone. "Just leave him be. He's got his cat, and that's all he needs." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. She'd see him in the library sometimes, poring over old books, his brow furrowed in concentration. He never checked anything out, just sat there for hours, lost in the pages. And then there was the cat. The way he treated it with such gentle reverence, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. It hinted at a depth of feeling that belied his outward appearance. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah saw Professor Orange sitting on a bench near the duck pond in Miller's Park. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass, and the leaves of the maple trees were ablaze with color. He was singing softly to the cat, a haunting melody that Sarah couldn't quite place. The cat, nestled in his lap, was purring contentedly. Sarah pulled out her phone, her heart pounding. She knew it felt intrusive, maybe even exploitative, but she couldn't help herself. She started filming. The video was short, just under a minute long. It showed Professor Orange, his face etched with lines of hardship but softened by the setting sun, stroking the orange cat's fur. He was singing a lullaby, his voice surprisingly clear and melodic. The lyrics were in a language Sarah didn't recognize, but the emotion was unmistakable. It was a song of love, of loss, of a bond that transcended words. Sarah hesitated before posting it. She added a caption, "This man and his cat live on the streets of Harmony Creek. I don't know his story, but I know there's more to him than meets the eye. Hashtag homelessness, hashtag compassion, hashtag Harmony Creek." She uploaded it to TikTok, more out of a sense of wanting to share this poignant moment than any expectation of it going viral. She went to bed that night feeling a mixture of guilt and hope. She woke up to a storm. Her phone was buzzing incessantly. Notifications flooded her screen. The video had exploded. Thousands of views, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Comments poured in, a torrent of empathy, curiosity, and speculation. "He's singing in Gaelic. My grandmother used to sing that song. He looks so sad. Someone needs to help him. That cat is his whole world. You can see it in his eyes. I bet he has an amazing story. Someone from Harmony Creek. Find out who he is." The local news station picked up the story. A reporter, Mark Reynolds, a young, ambitious journalist looking for his big break, tracked Sarah down. He wanted to interview her, to find Professor Orange, to uncover the mystery. Sarah, overwhelmed by the sudden attention, agreed. She felt a responsibility now, a sense of obligation to the old man she'd inadvertently thrust into the spotlight. They found Professor Orange in his usual spot in Miller's Park. He seemed bewildered by the attention, shrinking back from the camera and clutching the orange cat protectively. The cat, in turn, hissed at Mark and his microphone. "Sir," Mark began, his voice carefully modulated. "We've had a huge response to a video of you and your cat. People are very moved by your story. Would you be willing to talk to us?" Professor Orange looked at Sarah. His eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. Sarah knelt down beside him, speaking softly. "It's okay," she said. "They just want to help. They want to understand." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. He stroked the cat's fur, drawing comfort from its presence. "His name is Marmalade," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "He's my best friend." That was all he said that day. But it was enough. The interview, short as it was, added fuel to the fire. The video, now with millions of views, had become a national sensation. People were captivated by the mystery of Professor Orange and Marmalade. Donations started pouring in to a GoFundMe page set up by a local community group. Offers of help came from across the country. Mark Reynolds, sensing a career-making story, dedicated himself to uncovering Professor Orange's past. He started with the obvious: local records, the library archives, newspaper clippings. He interviewed longtime residents of Harmony Creek, piecing together fragments of memory and rumor. Sarah, meanwhile, spent hours with Professor Orange, slowly gaining his trust. She'd bring him coffee and sandwiches, sit with him in the park, and listen. At first, he spoke mostly to Marmalade, but gradually he began to open up to her. His real name, he told her, was Arthur McKinley. He had been a professor of Celtic studies at West Virginia University. He was a renowned scholar, an expert in ancient languages and folklore. He'd published several books, traveled the world, given lectures at prestigious universities. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Mark Reynolds discovered that Arthur McKinley had indeed been a respected professor. He'd been married to a woman named Eleanor, a talented artist, and they'd had a daughter, Lily, a bright, vivacious child who'd been the center of their world. Then came the tragedy.
A car accident.
A drunk driver. Eleanor and Lily were killed instantly. Arthur survived, but his life as he knew it was over. The newspaper clippings from that time told a heartbreaking story. Arthur McKinley, the brilliant scholar, disappeared from public view. He resigned from his university position, sold his house, and vanished. The whispers in Harmony Creek began. The once respected professor became Professor Orange, the crazy old man who talked to his cat. Mark found a former colleague of Arthur's, Dr. Emily Carter, a retired history professor who still lived in Morgantown. She remembered Arthur vividly. "He was brilliant," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "And so kind. He and Eleanor were devoted to each other, and Lily was their everything. After the accident, he just couldn't cope. He withdrew completely. We all tried to reach out to him, but he pushed everyone away. The investigation was turning up more than just facts. It was revealing the depth of a man's grief, the shattering impact of loss, and the quiet resilience of the human spirit, even in its most broken state." Sarah sat with Arthur in the park, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Marmalade was curled up on a blanket beside them, purring softly. Arthur was more talkative today, the layers of his protective shell slowly peeling away. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was everything. She was the sun, the moon, the stars. She painted the world with color. And Lily, she was our little songbird. She loved to sing, just like I used to." He showed Sarah a faded photograph he kept tucked inside his worn coat. It was a picture of Eleanor and Lily, their faces radiant with joy. Eleanor had long, flowing red hair, just like Marmalade's fur, and Lily had her mother's bright, sparkling eyes. He recounted the day of the accident, his voice faltering, his eyes welling up with tears. He'd been driving. They were on their way home from a family picnic. A truck had swerved into their lane. It had all happened so fast. "I remember the sound, the glass shattering." He couldn't go on. He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with sobs. Marmalade, sensing his distress, nudged his hand with his head, purring louder. Sarah put a hand on his arm, offering silent comfort. She didn't try to say anything. There were no words that could possibly ease his pain. He eventually composed himself, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I tried," he said, his voice hoarse. "I tried to go on, but everything reminded me of them. The house, the university, even the books I loved. They were all filled with their absence." He explained how he'd spiraled into a deep depression. He'd lost his job, his home, everything. He'd wandered aimlessly for years, sleeping rough, barely surviving. The grief was a constant, crushing weight, threatening to suffocate him. "I wanted to die," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I wanted to be with them, but something had stopped him. A flicker of hope, a tiny spark of life in the darkness. And that spark had come in the form of a small orange kitten. "I found him in an alley," Arthur said, stroking Marmalade's soft fur. He was just a tiny thing, all skin and bones, shivering in the cold. He was probably only a few weeks old. It had been a particularly brutal winter. Arthur was living on the streets of Charleston, West Virginia, at the time huddled in doorways trying to stay warm. He'd given up on everything, even on life itself. "I didn't want another responsibility," he said. "I couldn't even take care of myself. But he looked at me with those big, green eyes, and I couldn't leave him." He'd shared his meager food with the kitten, wrapped him in his coat to keep him warm. He'd named him Marmalade because of his color, the same vibrant hue as Eleanor's hair. "He saved me," Arthur said, his voice filled with emotion. "He gave me a reason to keep going. Someone to care for, someone who needed me." Marmalade, as if understanding, rubbed his head against Arthur's cheek. The bond between them was extraordinary. Marmalade was more than just a pet. He was Arthur's confidant, his companion, his lifeline. He was the only living being who had seen Arthur at his lowest, who had stayed with him through the darkest days. The cat had a calming effect on Arthur. When the nightmares came, the flashbacks of the accident. Marmalade would curl up on his chest, purring. His steady rhythm a soothing balm to Arthur's tormented soul. "He listens," Arthur said, smiling faintly. "He doesn't judge. He just loves me." Sarah realized that the conversations she'd witnessed, the songs Arthur sang to Marmalade, were more than just the ramblings of a broken mind. They were a form of therapy, a way for Arthur to express his grief, his love, his memories. Marmalade was his silent witness, his furry therapist, his constant companion on the long, arduous journey of healing. The story of Marmalade's arrival was a testament to the power of animal companionship, the profound impact a small creature can have on a human life, especially in times of profound loss and despair. It was a love story, not in the romantic sense, but in the purest, most unconditional form. The revelation of Arthur's past, coupled with the heartwarming story of his bond with Marmalade, transformed the public's perception of him. He was no longer just Professor Orange, the eccentric homeless man. He was Arthur McKinley, a brilliant scholar who had suffered unimaginable loss, a man who had found solace and companionship in a stray cat. The GoFundMe page exploded with donations. People from all over the country, touched by his story, offered support. Local businesses in Harmony Creek offered assistance: food, clothing, medical care. Martha Jenkins, Sarah's grandmother, who had initially warned Sarah to stay away from Arthur, was among the first to offer help. She baked him a pie, his favorite apple crumb, just like Eleanor used to make, a detail Sarah mentioned. When Martha delivered the pie, she shared some stories with Arthur. The two cried together. The shared tears are a testament to the power of community. The town council held a special meeting to discuss how to best assist Arthur. There was a sense of collective guilt, a realization that they had ignored one of their own for so long. The biggest challenge, however, was Arthur himself. He was hesitant to accept help. Years of living on the streets, of being invisible, had made him wary of people, of their intentions. He was fiercely independent, and the idea of relying on others was foreign to him. Sarah, Mark Reynolds, and Dr. Carter worked together to gently persuade him. They emphasized that it wasn't charity. It was a community coming together to support one of its own. They assured him that Marmalade would be with him every step of the way. Slowly, Arthur began to yield. He agreed to see a doctor who diagnosed him with PTSD and prescribed medication and therapy. He accepted the offer of temporary housing in a small, furnished apartment above the local bookstore, a cozy space with a window seat perfect for Marmalade to watch the world go by. The reintegration process was gradual and challenging. Arthur struggled with anxiety, with the unfamiliar routines of a normal life. He missed the freedom of the streets, even as he appreciated the warmth and comfort of his new home. But he persevered, driven by his love for Marmalade and a growing sense of hope. He started attending therapy sessions, slowly working through his trauma. He began to reconnect with the world, one step at a time. The apartment above the bookstore became Arthur's sanctuary. He filled it with books, returning to the world of scholarship he'd once abandoned. He started writing again, not academic treatises, but poetry, heartfelt verses about loss, love, and the healing power of companionship. The bookstore owner, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson, encouraged him. She even set up a small display of his poems, which quickly became popular with customers. Arthur also began volunteering at the local animal shelter, helping to care for the stray cats and dogs. He had a special connection with the animals, a deep understanding of their vulnerability and their need for love. One day, a group of students from the community college, Sarah's classmates, approached Arthur. They were working on a project about local history and had heard about his background in Celtic studies. They asked if he would be willing to give a guest lecture. Arthur was hesitant at first. The thought of standing in front of a classroom again, after all these years, was daunting. But Sarah encouraged him. "You have so much to offer," she said. "They'd be lucky to learn from you." He agreed tentatively. He prepared a lecture on the folklore of the Appalachian Mountains, drawing connections between the Celtic traditions of his ancestors and the stories and songs of the local community. The lecture was a resounding success. The students were captivated by his knowledge, his passion, and his personal story. He spoke with eloquence and humor, his eyes sparkling with the same intellectual fire that had once made him a renowned professor. After the lecture, several students came up to him, eager to ask questions and express their admiration. One young woman, her eyes shining with tears, said, "Thank you, Professor McKinley. You've inspired me." That moment, Arthur realized, was a turning point. He was no longer just surviving, he was thriving. He had found a purpose again, a way to share his knowledge and his experience with others. He began giving regular lectures at the community college, becoming a beloved figure on campus. He even started teaching a non-credit course on Celtic mythology at the local library, drawing a large and enthusiastic audience. Mark Reynolds, the reporter who had helped uncover Arthur's story, wrote a follow-up article, highlighting his remarkable recovery. The article was picked up by national news outlets, and Arthur's story became a symbol of hope and resilience. He received letters and emails from people all over the country, sharing their own stories of loss and healing. He responded to each one, offering words of comfort and encouragement. He understood, more than most, the power of connection, the importance of knowing that you're not alone. He never forgot Eleanor and Lily. He kept their memory alive in his heart, in his poems, in his love for marmalade. He visited their graves regularly, placing fresh flowers on their headstones and talking to them, telling them about his new life, about the kindness he'd received, about the joy he'd found again. Several years passed. Arthur McKinley, once known as Professor Orange, was now a respected member of the Harmony Creek community. He was no longer homeless, no longer lost in grief. He had a home, a purpose, and a network of friends and supporters. Marmalade, now a venerable old cat, was still his constant companion. He remained perched on Arthur's shoulder, a furry symbol of resilience and unwavering love. He'd slowed down a bit, his purr a little raspier, but his eyes still held the same knowing wisdom. Arthur continued to teach, to write, to inspire. He became a mentor to young people, sharing his wisdom and his experience. He often spoke about the importance of mental health, about the need to break down the stigma surrounding homelessness and mental illness. He established a small foundation in Eleanor and Lily's memory, providing scholarships for students studying the arts and humanities. He wanted to honor their creative spirits, to ensure that their legacy lived on. One sunny afternoon, Arthur sat on a bench in Miller's Park, the same bench where Sarah had first filmed him. Marmalade was curled up in his lap, basking in the warmth of the sun. He was surrounded by a group of children, listening intently as he told them a Celtic folktale, his voice animated, his eyes twinkling. Sarah, now a social worker with a thriving practice, watched him from a distance. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. She'd played a small part in Arthur's remarkable journey, but it was he who had done the hard work, who had found the strength to rebuild his life. Arthur looked up and saw her. He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached all the way to his eyes. He gave her a nod of acknowledgement, a silent thank you. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Arthur reflected on his life. He'd experienced profound loss, unimaginable pain, but he'd also found incredible resilience, unexpected kindness, and the enduring power of love. He knew that his story wasn't unique. There were countless others like him, struggling in silence, hidden in the shadows. He hoped that his story, his journey from despair to hope, would inspire others to reach out, to offer help, to see the humanity in everyone, even those who seemed lost. He stroked Marmalade's fur, feeling the comforting rhythm of his purr. He was grateful for every moment, for every breath, for every connection. He had found peace, not in forgetting the past, but in embracing the present, in living a life filled with purpose and meaning. His legacy would not be the scholarly books he'd written, but the lives he'd touched, the hearts he'd opened, the hope he'd rekindled. He was Professor Orange, yes, but he was also Arthur McKinley, a survivor, a teacher, a friend, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. forever bound to a grumpy, orange cat who had saved his life. And that, he realized, was more than enough. The years continued to roll by, each one adding a new layer of texture to Arthur's life in Harmony Creek. He became a fixture at town events, often invited to speak or simply to be present, a quiet symbol of the community's capacity for compassion and renewal. He'd attend the annual summer picnic in Miller's Park, sharing stories and laughter with the children, Marmalade always close by, now sporting a small, custom-made harness and leash, a concession to his advancing age and Arthur's protective instincts. He'd be there at the Christmas tree lighting ceremony, his eyes reflecting the twinkling lights, a reminder of the darkness he'd emerged from and the brightness he'd found. He even became a regular at the local high school football games, cheering on the Harmony Creek Hawks, his presence a good luck charm, according to the team. His apartment above the bookstore became a haven, not just for him and Marmalade, but for others seeking solace or advice. Sarah, now married with a young daughter of her own, would often visit, bringing her little girl, Lily, named, of course, in memory of Arthur's daughter, to play with Marmalade. The two had an instant connection, the child's laughter filling the apartment with a joy that Arthur had thought he'd never experience again. Dr. Carter, Arthur's former colleague, also became a regular visitor. They'd spend hours discussing history, literature, and life, their shared intellectual passion rekindled. Dr. Carter even helped Arthur edit and publish a collection of his poems, titled Marmalade's Musings, which became a surprise bestseller, further spreading his story and message of hope. The proceeds from the book went to the Eleanor and Lily McKinley Foundation, allowing it to expand its reach, supporting not only students but also local animal shelters and mental health initiatives. Arthur's story had come full circle, transforming his personal tragedy into a force for good in the world. One spring morning, Arthur woke up to find Marmalade unusually quiet. The old cat was curled up in his usual spot on Arthur's chest, but his breathing was shallow, his purr faint. Arthur knew. He held Marmalade close, stroking his fur, whispering words of love and gratitude. Marmalade passed away peacefully in Arthur's arms, surrounded by the warmth of their shared home and the love that had sustained them both for so many years. The loss was profound, a deep ache in Arthur's heart. But it was different from the grief he'd experienced before. This time, he had a support system, a community to lean on. He had Sarah, Dr. Carter, Mrs. Peterson, the entire town of Harmony Creek. They held a small memorial service for Marmalade in Miller's Park, near the duck pond where Sarah had first filmed them. People came from all over, sharing stories and memories of the grumpy orange cat who had touched so many lives. Arthur spoke, his voice filled with emotion, but also with strength. Marmalade was more than just a pet, he said. He was my family, my friend, my savior. He taught me the meaning of unconditional love, the power of resilience, and the importance of never giving up hope. He will always be a part of me, a part of Harmony Creek. He buried Marmalade beneath a newly planted orange tree, a vibrant symbol of their enduring bond. The tree, he knew, would grow tall and strong, its blossoms providing shade and beauty for generations to come, a living testament to the love that had blossomed between a broken man and a stray cat. Arthur continued to live in the apartment above the bookstore, surrounded by his books and memories. He continued to teach, to write, to inspire. He adopted another cat, a small, gray tabby he named Eleanor, a tribute to his late wife. Eleanor, the cat, was different from Marmalade, of course, but she brought her own unique brand of comfort and companionship to Arthur's life. He often thought about the journey he'd taken, from the depths of despair to the heights of hope. He'd learned that grief never truly disappears, but it can be transformed, channeled into something positive, something meaningful. He'd learned that even in the darkest of times, there is always light to be found, often in the most unexpected places. He'd learned the power of community, the importance of human connection, the healing balm of compassion. He'd learned that even a small act of kindness, like filming a homeless man and his cat, can have a ripple effect, changing lives in ways that no one could ever imagine. And he knew with absolute certainty that his story, his legacy, would live on, Not just in the books he'd written or the foundation he'd established, but in the hearts of everyone he'd touched, in the spirit of Harmony Creek, a town that had embraced him, healed him, and given him a second chance at life. He was, and always would be, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, forever linked to the memory of a grumpy, orange cat named Marmalade, and the town that had learned to see beyond the whispers and into the heart of a man who had lost everything and found it all again. He was at home,